Hello and welcome to another episode of Office Hours. This is number 713. Ah,
Man,
that's why we're getting gray. That's a lot of shows.
it really is.
You stop and think about that. I mean, it's kind of like, wow, what have we been doing with our lives? Well, we keep showing up here on Thursdays.
Man, we're here. We're consistent. I love being on the program with you, man.
Same here, same here. And we're actually going to get in person in a couple of weeks in New York City at a phenomenal mastermind. And if you've got an IPO that you're considering, this is the one that you ought to take a look at. Yeah.
It's at NASDAQ. Yeah.
Yeah, it's at NASDAQ, and the mastermind, we're going to have a dinner in the IPO room in the NASDAQ headquarters. So it's going to be quite a deal, quite a shindig, quote unquote.
That's right. That's right. So I can't wait to be with you. I think, Gigi, do we have something to roll up about that mastermind? If people wanted to sign up?
Yeah, if we wanted to run that across the bottom, we'll see what we've got. We've got David's book there right now. But while she's preparing that, why don't we just kind of put this little puppy in gear and start the show. Our first guest today is quite an honor. I mean, Rhett and I both were perusing his bio in the background, and boy, you talk about rich and deep and broad and impressive. It kind of covers all four of these little boxes in this matrix. John Hillen, board chairman and professor at Hillen Strategy and Governance. I mean, that's his current position. Former undersecretary, assistant secretary of state. I mean, I could go on and on. I hate to read bios, but I just want to give you a sense of where he's coming from and what he's going to be speaking into is not just something that's theoretical. This is steeped in real world experience and incredible successes in his life and in the way that he's actually led and touched the lives of others. So, John, I want to just welcome you to the show.
Well, thanks, guys. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. You've got a new book that, I mean, literally just dropped in January, and we want to talk a little bit about that, strategic dialogues. And I love the phrase dialogues, strategic dialogues. When I started doing some work with Nokia back in the mid 1990s, when they were still a large conglomerate and they were selling rubber tires and rubber boots and pickaxes and hose and all kinds of stuff, television sets, and I worked with them for about 12 years in developing and leading a large chunk of their leadership initiative when they moved to telephony as the primary focus. And kind of part of that whole process, they brought Michael Hammer in from Harvard to help kind of suss out basically a strategic initiative for the near and midterm as they started migrating from that conglomerate piece to now we're a pure telephony play. What does that mean? And how do we actually go to market now? The question of strategy has always fascinated me. So the dialogic portion of this, a primer on business strategy and strategic management. Can you give us a couple of high points on the dialogic nature of strategy setting and where we kind of go with that?
Yeah, so Blaine, this occurred to me when I was teaching the core strategy course in an MBA program. And I've been a practicing strategist, both in the military, as a diplomat, and then also as a CEO. In fact, I did a IPO in 2009 in the middle of the recession. So I had that dinner right in NASDAQ, right where you guys are going to have your dinner. It was one of only 25 IPOs in the entire American economy that year. And what made it possible is we wanted to fill a hole in the market. Well, what does that even mean? That means you have to be able to conceptualize the market, see where everybody else is, where new customers might be, and how to move your organization from one place to the other. That is the art of strategy. A lot of people mistake it. They think it's a goal. Well, goal's a part of it. But they think it's a vision. Yeah, vision's a part of it, or a mission or values, all that. But a strategy is the full game plan, the full blueprint to move an organization from the point it is in now to a point of greater advantage in the future. So I try to lay that out in the book. And I did it in dialogues, I think, which led, Patrick Lencioni and others to endorse the book, because that's how people learn. They go back and forth and back and forth. They talk it out. And by doing so, they ascend to a higher understanding of what can be sometimes intimidating or ephemeral ideas, because they're like, okay, now I understand what you're saying. So I tried to repeat these dozens, hundreds of conversations I've had about strategy as a teacher and a strategic leader in the book to walk people through how you get to strategic understanding.
I love that.
John, what's really interesting to me about this, and I would love to get your take and your thoughts. I work with a lot of businesses today as an advisor and coach, and I feel like leadership and management and even strategy, and I love the word strategic management. Things are changing so fast. So how do we have a strategy? How do we have a strategy that looks out a year, 2 years, 5 years, like we like to do? That seems almost impossible today. What are your thoughts on how do you strategically manage a business today in this environment?
Yeah, well, it's all the more necessary because of what you pointed out, Rhett, this rapidly changing dynamic environment in which every business exists. I think what people can take comfort in is strategy is an unnatural act for many executives. One study I cite in the book shows only 4% of executives naturally think strategically. In other words, I'll try to talk you guys into something by showing a series of moves of how getting the report done by the end of the month could lead us to be in a better position in 2 years. And I connect those moves for you. That's the strategic action logic. Most executives are just trying to get stuff done.
Yeah.
They're focused on task accomplishment. And so their rationale is, well, we get it done by the end of the month because it's due at the end of the month. What else do you need to know? Or, I need the data. That's when I can make a decision. So let's get the data by the end of the month. But to think strategically is to activate a muscle in a different part of your brain. The processing part of your brain, the part that crunches data and makes early decisions, quick decisions, is your left brain. Your right brain is your more creative side, more intuitive. It reaches for the future, tries to understand the situations, the ambiguity of the future. So there's an art of a possible, future orientation, creative nature to strategy. Everybody, once they know where that muscle is, can learn how to activate it. And then there's machines in the gym to go work it out. And I try to walk people through that way of thinking in the book.
Yeah, that way of thinking, like you say, it's an atrophied muscle for many people. But playing games, I mean, chess, or when I lived in Japan, I started playing Go. Just strategic games that required me looking 10, 15 moves ahead sometimes. And I was struck by, when the first oil embargo, and I think we're all gray enough and old enough to remember this one. But I recall that Royal Dutch Shell had done some scenario planning, and they actually had an area or a division in the company, a department in the company, that's all they did was scenario planning. How do you connect scenario planning? And by the way, Royal Dutch Shell had scenario planned an oil embargo, and so they were prepared to strategically shift. What's the symbiotic, but what's the relational link between scenario planning and strategic thinking or strategy development?
Right. Well, I think you put your finger on it, Blaine, because the meta theme of the book, which is full of frameworks and methods that people can use to think strategically, but the meta theme is strategy is a way to think, not a what to think. It's not some formula you plug the numbers into, you get the correct answer. There's only the answer you get and how well your thought process was to get to it. So a lot of companies do strategic planning. Most of the time, it's a thinly disguised annual budget drill. And so I actually have a chapter in the book talking about strategic planning, and especially for companies that are really focused on logistics or operational excellence of some kind. I suggest scenario planning because it allows them to imagine different futures and then how they would act in those futures. It breaks them out of that mold of looking for data, because if you're looking for data, it's necessarily about the past. It drags your mind backwards. But if you're trying to cast your mind forward into a possible future and how your enterprise would react to that, you need to maybe use scenarios and then try to position What would we do in different futures? And the art is not to pick the right future. It's not some crystal ball exercise. The art is to have that discussion, that dialogue, which just opens up the whole aperture and gets people thinking strategically.
Which is anathema to a lot of leaders because, like you said right at the beginning, they want to get shit done. I mean, that's kind of how they're wired.
Exactly.
So, John, where can people find out more about, number one, the book, I'm assuming is on all the regular sources, but I've also got a hunch you've got a website that we could probably point people to here that would be useful.
Sure. Yeah, it's available everywhere. A lot of people buying it on Amazon, as they do these days. And there's a lot of reviews up from people. People have said things about it, and even I didn't imagine, but a great response from the public. And my website is johnhillen.com. And there's all sorts of other things I've done. I've written books on leadership and other things, but I've all sorts of resources and materials on there. But what I'm trying to do is take strategy out of the clouds. It's not for the few, the rare, the privileged, and put it into the hands of every working executive and say, oh, I can do this. I don't need to hire an expensive consulting firm to figure out my strategy. I can learn to think strategically and implement that for my organization.
Great. Now that's an aspiration. Put McKinsey out of business.
Yes.
Yeah. John, thank you very much. It's been an absolute honor to host you on the show. I know David wasn't able to make it today, but I'm sure he would like to have a conversation as well. And we've got a couple of other shows that we would love to have you on as a way to kind of promote this book.
Great. Thanks for what you're doing. I think it makes the whole community that much richer in their approach to their businesses.
Well, thank you, my friend. You take care. Have a good weekend.
Thanks. You too.
Wow.
I love that.
That was good.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that whole idea of like just getting in the mindset of looking forward like that and planning what worlds could exist, even if you don't get it right, you've thought about how to, it teaches you how to think that way, right? That's really good.
Yeah, and it really is. It's the thinking, and you and I both are with the Napoleon Hill Institute, and Napoleon's whole thing was thinking. You think yourself into certain realities. So the idea, I love this notion of drift. Yeah, when people stop thinking, they start drifting, and the next thing they know, they're going, "How'd I get here?"
I look in my first business in the toy company. When I got, somebody told me one day, he said, "Rhett, you need to get off of the truck. You need to get out of the delivery stuff and sit in your office and think strategically." And when we did that, when I took a chance and we hired those people to do the things that we had been doing, we grew. That's when we blew up, right? When I was able to work on the business, not in the business, and work on the important strategic things, it made all the difference.
Yeah. And to I think John's point that he made it, and I reemphasized it, was, you got to be willing to stop and think. Stay, it's that gestation period that something else emerges. And too many executives are too much hands-on in the weeds. They're in the business, not on the business, sort of a deal. Yep. Our next guest has got some ideas on this. He's a thought leader, and Jim McDermott has got some very interesting points of view around this. And Jim, I want to just welcome you to the show on behalf of both Rhett and myself here. You've got a fascinating background too. I love our guest today. You raised over $3 billion with the B dollars for transformative climate solutions. Okay, so we're just going to put that one in a place here that I think deserves its own little pedestal. We're going to put that right there. But you've also got some other initiatives going on just from an entrepreneurial background relative to how you think about and how you actually work with folks in the domain of leadership. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, going to be a very interesting conversation, because that is a place that Rhett and I both live in, is working with leaders and how they develop their expertise. I'll just kind of drop this in and see what you do with it, and we'll just kind of wiggle around it. The definition that we've been working with, that I've been working with for about 15 years now, is that leadership is the activity of influencing others in order to co-create coordinated movement in pursuit of a worthy ideal. So just 4 components: influencing, command and control disappears, co-creation, ownership transfer happens, coordinated movement. We're moving into unknown territory by definition if we're actually doing it well. So we're going to step on each other's toes. How do we actually leverage conflict effectively? And for the sake of what? Well, that worthy ideal that has meaning associated with it. So with that bundle, dropping that in your lap, how does that work with the way that you actually organize your leadership?
It's actually interesting. I dropped in to listen to the guy who preceded me, and it was fascinating to talk about. First of all, it's really nice to meet both of you. I mean, it's funny, that definition of leadership actually fits very nicely with a number of things that I've been doing. And maybe to just give a little bit of background to sort of get you up to speed on where I started off as a project and energy finance investment banker 30 some odd years ago in New York, and was very, very interested in sort of the mechanical and electrical engineering that went with that, and ultimately decided that I would move out to California. You talk about sort of exercising leadership. It had become apparent to me after building many, many coal plants and natural gas power plants that eventually wind and solar were going to be very large businesses. So in 1995, I left New York after a pretty lengthy time of being an investment banker with the idea that I would exercise my own leadership and move out to California and become a wind and solar developer. And that ultimately didn't work. But what I had seen from sort of a progression of ideas was that we were on a long, slow march to decarbonize the world. And this is long before anybody was talking about carbon in the atmosphere or ESG or sustainability, because those names change quite a bit and frequently. But it was the idea that over time, we as humanity will produce more and more kilojoules of energy with fewer and fewer tons of carbon output. And so I could see that solar was going to come, and then wind, and then ultimately probably nuclear. And so in terms of sort of exercising that leadership, one of the things that I realized was that I got out to California and it actually didn't work. There was a big Enron debacle, and the markets were over engineered. And so I ended up, because I had no money, and generally speaking, energy is a fairly energy intensive or dollar intensive business. I ran out of postage one night, and I thought, well, this is a great way. I'll basically create a program that allows you to print postage. So I built a company from my dorm room in graduate school that became stamps.com, and I took it public. And then I took a big slug of that capital and I started a firm in 2003 called US Renewables Group, which was focused exclusively on stationary power generation, clean fuels, and energy infrastructure. And I spent the next, from 2003 till about 2017, investing and frankly, going out and, evangelizing and talking to people about, like, look, this is a future that's coming. How do we basically influence others to understand that that's a business that you can make money just like you did in coal and natural gas, and did that. And these days, what I'm doing, in 2017, one of my partners turned 70 and I was 40. I guess I was 48 and he retired. So I reconstituted the firm as Racine Capital Management. And what we do now is invest in all of the technologies, because when you look at these types of waves that come through, the first one is always an infrastructure wave. And then the second tends to be more technically driven, like kind of products. So we're invested in products. And then the piece that I think is really germane to what you said is that we're spending a lot of time starting to get out and talking to people, younger people, about, I think that there's been a sort of a misunderstanding with a lot of people who are under 30 or 35 that climate's totally out of control and it can't be fixed. And it actually turns out that many of the technologies already exist. They're starting to go into their sort of the steeper part of their growth curve. And so we spend a lot of time influencing, talking to people about all the opportunities that exist and how the opportunity to both make a lot of money, which is a prerequisite in America and frankly in any capitalist system, but also have a dual purpose, which is to do things they're going to have meaning in the sense of reducing the total amount of carbon emission or addressing carbon pollution is kind of what we do. And I do that from 3 perspectives. One is just straight up investing. I mean, I have a firm called Racine Capital Management that invests across the spectrum from very, very early stage stuff all the way to large capital assets. The second way we do it is being involved in legislation and helping sort of from a policy perspective. And that third one is just getting on shows like this and getting the word out to folks, particularly younger people, that there's a large economic opportunity here that I think a lot of times politics, there's a lot of sort of shouting these days. But when you look at the fundamental economics that underpin what's going on, it's a massive growth opportunity. I mean, it's sort of simultaneously one of the scariest things that people can conjure up, which is, the climate's burning up. But if you look at the other side of that coin, what you realize is that almost every major disaster yields some sort of huge economic opportunity. And so it's kind of talking to people about, hey, look, you need to reimagine what looks like a disaster. Often, if you can turn it over and stay calm and look at it from the right perspective, is often a massive economic opportunity. And that's what we spend a lot of time talking to people about.
Jimmy,
I don't know if that, yeah.
That's perfect. Where does the consumer sit in this? I'm curious what your thought is on, because there is a lot of noise right now, right? And there are, depending on what administration's in office and who's in office, we talk about green, and one administration talks about green, one doesn't. But where does the consumer sit in this in terms of these products that you're talking about? I mean, is there
I think, yeah.
Are they demanding that we have products that
it's actually it's a fascinating Rhett, it's a fascinating sort of analytic question, and the truth of it is that it's very similar. I don't know if you've ever read Crossing the Chasm, but basically, this whole idea of early adopters, it's been very clear for the better part of a decade that there's sort of somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% of the population is just willing to pay more. And pay more, if you want to take electricity, is probably the best sort of analog for that. Pay more is, there's a whole set of people that are willing to pay 15 to 20% more for their electricity. The vast majority, and we're past that. We are past that, which is those people have all spent their money, and the curves, if you think about solar as a good example, in 2010, so if solar was $100 per megawatt hour, it's about $5 now. So it's had this just massive drop. And where the consumer sits in this at this point, particularly like within electricity and fuels, is that you can simply just make the decision to buy a lower carbon emission electron or a gallon of fuel, and it's functionally the same price. So it's really just simply saying, all things being equal, I'll take the one that's lower carbon. And I think, again, it's been a very normal cycle, and we've done this. I mean, we did this in natural gas. Actually, we did it coal in the 50s. Natural gas, telecom, I can go through the whole thing, that in the beginning, they were all subsidized and they were expensive. And then as Wright's law kicked in and you really saw, that 7% per annum drop that you see. So at this point, the consumer has a whole myriad of products, particularly on the electricity side, that are cheaper in some cases, but at least at parity with fossil across the whole spectrum of things. So it's just really kind of alerting people to the fact that if they buy this way, it'll continue that flywheel of things getting cheaper and cheaper. What's really fascinating, Rhett, is that what's really making it go lower is that all of the initial asset base that was built in the kind of the early 2010s now has been fully amortized and the debt's been paid off. And the marginal production cost of wind, if you don't have to pay back for the capital, is radically cheap. Like, 10 or 15% the cost of a new build natural gas power plant. And so as more and more of that product comes on, it's increasingly saying this is the low cost answer. So if you want the cheapest answer, buy lower carbon, electrons and fuel and things of that nature. So I think one of the things that's funny is that a lot of the narrative is, it's also very expensive and you shouldn't buy it. But that the customer's being asked to sort of overpay. That's patently untrue if you look market by market in the U.S.
Yeah, and that is, I think, a function of a narrative that isn't particularly well crafted. People are hearing things that are not necessarily truth. There's a big distinction, I think, between facts and truth that can be made here. And facts can actually compromise the access that people have to truth in one sense here. And to your point, the truth is we've got viable solutions
Oh yeah, I mean, I often say to people that when you think about low carbon, it's really not a technical question at this point.
Right.
It's a
Right.
question of political will and money,
Yep.
right? And like to give you an example of it, right? I used to be the investment banker to a lot of coal companies. The reality is no more new coal will be built in the United States, not necessarily because the president says so or the Congress says so, or it's because the financial community has decided that they are no longer interested in lending to it from a liability perspective.
Right.
And once you can't get debt for something that requires 70% loan to value, it's as if it's gone. Yeah. And I think these are the types of things like, and that right, it's kind of hard to sell papers around that idea, but that's a functional reality at this point.
Yeah.
And where conversely, the stability of, solar, wind, which are leading at now. I mean, electric cars are starting to go through this trajectory where people are realizing like, hey, these things work. There's enough electricity, availability, and the charging stations are getting quicker and faster and more, there's more of them. That when you actually go out and experience those things now, what you realize is the lower carbon answers are totally viable. I mean, because right, what once was a criticism, say 10 years ago, which is if you had an electric car, the whole concept of range anxiety, right? That's just not a reality in a lot of places now. I'm not saying that the whole country's perfect, but there's lots of places now where the lower carbon answers are in fact ubiquitous, low cost, and reliable.
Great.
Right.
Jim, where can people find out more about this? And again, I'm kind of pointing toward the narrative. I'm assuming.
I would say there are two spots. You can find me. We're in the middle of a redo on Rusheen, which is www. Rusheen, which is RUSHEEN.com, which is our where we do most of our investing. Kind of talks about the things that we do. And the other one is if you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm James A.C. McDermott. That's a long name. My mother thought that I needed to have two middle names. But I post on the regular talking about these topics and just sort of trying to make sure that, I mean, it's an educational thing. I'm not really trying to sell anything there, but just sort of getting the word out about what are the major topics, what are the major themes, how should you be thinking about them, and then highlighting companies, some of which we own, many of which we don't, but that just sort of talk about, when you're trying, because one of the things that we see, particularly in clean tech and in sort of these emerging sectors, is that a lot of people, consumers in particular, don't really know where to go. They want to take action. They have no idea what companies matter. So oftentimes we'll work through themes of, okay, well, if you want to buy electricity, what should you think about? If you want to buy, if you're thinking about cars, or if you're thinking about, carbon reduction, we take a category, we break it down, we talk about companies, talk about the ones that we think are interesting and exciting, and we basically publish it out there so people can see, and from there they can take action.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for being so erudite. I'm going to just put it in that way. This was kind of a little bit of a fire hose conversation, and I loved it. There was a lot here, and you made it accessible. So I want to thank you for that. That was
good. Well, I'm glad. I think what you guys are doing is terrific. As I've started to venture out into I used to joke a lot that private equity is very private, and so you don't meet a lot of people. But as I found going out and starting to meet people in these internet forums is hopefully helps raise awareness and consciousness, but also it's really fun to meet and talk to people. So I appreciate the time.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Very good.
You take care. Guys. Bye-bye. Wow. Good stuff.
Right. Fire hose there.
Yeah, and I'm just mindful of our time here. We've got Sabina in the wings, and she's been waiting for a bit here. Sabina, welcome. You're the boss.
Thank you.
Yeah. New book that you've got out, and your background is also, I mean, our guests today have got some fascinating depth to what it is that you're bringing to the conversations. You teach. You have been. You were at Microsoft for years. You worked with Gates and Steve Ballmer. Steve's actually my neighbor up here. So there's, you've done a lot, and you've, worked with, some of the largest, Microsoft development teams, and then you transitioned out, and now you're living up in British Columbia, which I'm looking at Vancouver Island out my window right now. So it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Can you talk a little bit, you're the boss, becoming a manager that you want to be, that management question. There's pressure from the top, there's pressure from the bottom. And if you don't know how to actually intelligently and elegantly handle that pressure, you end up not becoming a diamond. You actually get a compressed piece of coal, and it's not pretty. So what have you got to point us towards, relative to what you described in the book?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the show. And we're practically neighbors, Blaine. We'll just wave at each other once in a while and
Yeah.
get rid of each other. In You're the Boss, there are really three things to keep in mind. One, as you say, is about pressure, but it's also about power. And we like to say power corrupts, but that's wrong. It's not power that corrupts, it's pressure. When we are under pressure, we say and do things that are coming from a reactive place. Our brain stops thinking, we go into survival mode, our tone gets louder, harsher than we intend, and it sets other people off with their pressure gauges redlining. So first of all, pressure corrupts. And then power comes in, and it becomes the great divider, as in nobody is going to tell you the corruptive actions you're taking as a result of being under pressure. Believe it or not, almost every client I coach is shocked when they receive feedback from the people they work with, because they didn't wake up wanting to star as the villains in their own story. They woke up wanting to do a great job and motivating their people, and here they are, a hot mess because people are misinterpreting, and or pressure is making them act in some ways that they don't realize doesn't work well. So pressure is the silent corruptor, power is the great divider, and as you get promoted, promotions are the most dangerous times in your career when you don't manage these twin forces of pressure and power well.
Yeah.
Well,
Rhett, please.
No. Go ahead, Blaine. Go ahead. And
No. I was just going to segue into power and pressure. I love that distinction, and I know that you've had some direct experience with that, Rhett. So, yeah.
Well, I got to say, Sabina, I'm glad that we've got three executive coaches here on the program tonight, because I think this is an interesting question, and maybe we can all bat it around. I was at this conference last week in Las Vegas, and called Transform, which is really for talent management and CHROs. And one of the fascinating conversations, and I had this 3 or 4 times, so there's something going on in coaching. But I heard coaching is dead several times. And what people are looking for in talent management now and executive development are coaches that have actually built systems, they've built companies. They're looking for people who've actually done it to play more of a hybrid role as a coach and advisor to senior execs. And not just somebody that's takes the ICF model or one of these sort of models. What do you think about that? And why what somebody said to me was that things like Better Up and some of these ways that people are finding coaching now have really hurt results and have really hurt coaching. What do you think?
Well, I am not a purist, so I'm always up for innovating and munging things together to get the best out for the client. That said, I'm not sure many people understand what coaching truly is until they're coached, because they do confuse and conflate mentoring with coaching, advice giving, all of those things. And research shows that we all love to ask for advice and we don't follow advice. I personally am quite allergic to advice. But when I coach people, absolutely, it isn't just, oh, tell me what you think and let me ask you only questions. I will jump in with, I'm not going to let my client leave the room with spinach stuck between their teeth. So if that's the case, I'm going to go, hey, wait a minute, let me hold up that mirror for you. So
Yeah.
I think that there is a sensible medium there. My concern would be we swing the pendulum from one end to the other end without full knowledge, just because we're chasing something new or thinking we're getting on some kind of trend bandwagon. Most of my clients, before they've had the experience of coaching, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are, would say, if offered, hey, would you like someone to come and advise you, to give you answers? They're going to say, yes, please. I think they're going to choose that. And that's a seduction, because the answer is all in them. It's never, a coach is not going to know what's really going on there to give them. And there are no silver bullets, of course, either. So spoiler alert.
Yeah. That conflation between coaching and consulting and advising and mentoring. Yeah. I, with a collaborator of mine, we developed a mentoring program for AstraZeneca a number of years ago. And the executives that we were working with kept going back and forth. Is this coaching or is this mentoring? How do we parse this? I mean, that's sort of the thing. And the consulting piece, there's an old joke in the organizational development arenas where, the consultant will come in, grab your wrist, look at your watch, and tell you what time it is. So ideally, from my perspective, and I think, Sabina, you're landing right on this, is that coaching pulls something inside of, pulls out something that's innately inside that may not be recognized. And when it's actually brought to the surface, now there's an ownership component to it that belies the need to have dependency on the coach in this regard, or in that resource. I mean, my oldest client has been with me for 30 years.
Wow.
But it's been through all kinds of different iterations, and I'm more to the point of being an advisor now, to your point, Rhett, than I am, the coaching. I mean, we got to the point where they're now good friends, so coaching becomes problematic in one sense. I certainly don't try to coach my wife. I would be that'd be a non-starter.
Danger area right there.
Major. But I can serve as an advisor, and that has, it changed the nature of our relationship, but there's still value being generated there. So I think, this is a kind of a long soliloquy where I'm really kind of saying there's not a purist, but you have to have the awareness of where you're at in that relational dynamic in order to be of service.
Exactly. And being really clear about that, and clear about what your boundaries are in those situations, what the expectations you need to set are, so that you're doing that with a sense of ethics and responsibility.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. Where can people find out about more about your book, but also more about you as an advisor and a coach?
Yeah, they could go to my website, sabinanawaz.com, and sign up for my Substack called Pressure Proof there. That will give them some day-to-day practical tips on how to make sure that pressure doesn't corrupt your actions. And that's not just for bosses and managers, but for everybody, because who here among us isn't facing a lot of pressure these days?
Yeah, my hand's in the air. Sabina, thank you very much. And I apologize on behalf of both Rhett and I. David wasn't able to make it today. He just returned from Spain and is up to his eyeballs. You talk about pressure and
exactly.
So we got stuff going on there, but we will have you back on some other shows if you're willing to kind of participate with us. We'd love to have you back. You bring a lot to the table, and I love it.
Thank you so much. What a joy to also collaborate on the discussion. That was really fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. Yeah.
Thanks
for bringing it as a possibility.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Sabina. Whew. Boy, that was a good one. Good one.
Yeah, we did it again, man.
One more time of feeling. Yes. Yeah. What's the takeaway for you today?
Did you ever watch or listen to Car Talk?
Yeah, I love that show. Frickin' frack. Yeah.
Where he said, wasted a perfectly good hour with, but you haven't wasted a perfectly good 45 minutes with us. That's for sure, because that was jam-packed today. Takeaway. I don't know that I've got a concise takeaway on that, except that those are three people doing unbelievable work at a level that is amazing. And I guess coming back from was it Jim's talk, it's interesting that he didn't seem to faze him, the different language and the different conversation around climate and climate tech and climate. The current situation didn't seem to faze him at all. He thinks that it seemed that's doesn't matter who it is, that this technology is being developed and these companies are going to be making products because the consumer is going to demand it. But that was fascinating, because I would have thought that industry would be suffering right now, but it sounds like it's maybe even a great investment. So that was fascinating. I mean, I think all of that was just really interesting. I don't know that I got a concise takeaway from it, but well, I'm still processing.
Yeah, no, I mean, these are great conversations. I'll just kind of pick up on that. For me, the nature of a calamity or a catastrophe or some disruption embedded in that is always, I mean, there's a pony in here somewhere. Yeah, sort of a notion. Yeah, there's a pony in here somewhere. And this is kind of my takeaway on this, and we started off the conversation about looking at the nature of drift. When people stop thinking about things, they start drifting and end up somewhere that they never intended. Being willing to do some strategic thinking, scenario planning, kind of what if. And Marcus Aurelius talked about this. Cicero talked about this. When you read some Stoic philosophy, just kind of paying attention to if it goes off the rails, what is it likely to look like, and how do I set myself up? Not that I'm going to encourage that or anything else, but it'd be nice to know that I've got there's a contingency plan. And oil embargoes, gas prices, tariffs coming in. I mean, all of these things, the pressure and power dynamic. I think it all can contribute to me designing, as long as I'm willing to stay awake and continue thinking, a pretty good foothold for a future that's actually going to be pretty generative in the long term. But I've got to stay awake.
Yeah. And more so today, right?
Yeah.
Because the changes are coming at you so fast. And if you're not thinking in that way, I think you're going to get, you're going to get disrupted, I think. So.
Run over. Yeah.
Over, gosh. Yeah. There are
all that good kind of stuff.
All kinds of adjectives for that.
It's cocktail time for you, I think, in Lisbon.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. Okay. I'm going to cut us loose here. Thanks again. I love doing the show with you, Rhett, and I'm looking forward. Folks, Friday is David's 6 a.m. There you go. 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern is free training. You can find out more about that. And I don't think we've got a Sharon for the mastermind that we're doing in New York on the 15th. But I imagine David could actually mention that tomorrow in his training group. So if you would like to find out more information, ping him while you're there. Okay. There you go. And there's not to confuse things, but that's my mastermind. So
you just wrapped up. Didn't you just wrap up a big course today, or a big thing today?
We just wrapped up a six episode series on decision making.
How'd that go?
It went great. It went really, really well.
What were the takeaways?
That decision making is not for the faint of heart. Most people don't make high quality decisions. They make reactive decisions, and then again, you kind of end up looking around going, how'd I get here? Well, you got decisions that you made back there aggregated over time got you here. Yep. So we wanted to just kind of unbundle that. We had some good participation on it. So it's up live on LinkedIn. So if people want to take a look at it, I'm certain it's still floating around up there.
Yep. Hey, well, thank you.
I'll see you next week, and then we get to see each other live on the 15th in New York.
That's it.
The IPO Mastermind.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care, Rhett.
Thank you, guys.